Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael K. Potter, and I'm the Managing Director of Post Productions. And today we are interviewing Jonathan Tessier, the playwright behind Which Way, Millennial Man, which opens at the Shadowbox Theater on February 21st, 2025, for a 3-week run. Jonathan's play won the 2023 Windsor-Essex Playwriting Contest. Uh, but unfortunately couldn't be produced in 2024 for various logistical reasons. So it is joining our almost entirely season of new plays in 2025. And we're very, very excited to finally be able to present it to the public. So, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Now, this is the second time that you've won the Windsor-Essex Playwriting Contest. You won in 2021 with Stuck, which we produced in the fall of 2022. This makes you one of only two people who's won the contest more than once. How does that
Yeah.
feel?
Well, it feels pretty good. I was this contest is what inspired me to start writing. So yeah, it feels pretty
Awesome.
good. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you've submitted, I think, every year except 24, right?
I think so. Like, yeah, the recent one was the only one I didn't submit to.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing. There are only a handful of writers who have submitted every single year, and we always look forward to your entries.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about the development of Which Way Millennial Man. Where did this come from? Where were you when the idea struck you, or how did it bubble up to the surface?
Well, to be honest, this idea for the play, it kind of started all the way back in 2018. Back when I think that was the year of the first playwriting
It
contest
was,
that
yeah.
you guys held. And I wanted to write a play about a school shooter, and I always thought I would have the play take place in like the interrogation room of a police headquarters, and they'd be interrogating this school shooter. But I kept writing that play, and for some reason it just didn't work. Like every time I tried to write it, there was just something that I wasn't able to get with it. So I kind of changed gears, and I thought I should maybe write about the school shooter's dad and make it have it be 10 years after the school shooting, and have it be a little bit more about the people who were in his life and the community that he was in and how it was affected, instead of it just being like the time of the school shooting. And I think it just worked out a lot better to do it that way.
And what led you to that realization?
So I think the problem was the school shooter character Bradley. Now, every single draft of this play that I've ever written, there's always been a school shooter in Bradley, and he's been in every draft, but for some reason I couldn't get audiences to, or not I couldn't get people to like him. I felt when I read the script, he just came off as just such an annoying, bratty, whiny kind of kid, and I don't think people would have resonated with him. They just would have, disliked him. And I felt that when I was thinking about the people in his life are just as important as Bradley himself, and like those people are like were affected by the tragedy almost just as much. And I felt that there was just such a richer character in his dad that I could bring out, instead of just this kind of, incel whiny kid who, he just shot up a school. No one's going to have empathy for him, but his dad is a little bit different of a story. He's someone you can get a little more empathy from. He's someone you can get a little more, I'll make him a little more likable than this kid who just shot up a school. And I think that's where I really hit my stride and where I wanted to tell this story.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
remember Shooter really well. You submitted it in 2018. It went on to the second round. So you submitted another draft
Mhm.
and then you submitted it again, I think 2 years later.
Yep.
And again it went on to round two. And we all really liked it. I mean, that's why I kept going on to round two. There was just something that was holding it back, and we couldn't quite get our finger on what that was. And then when you submitted this play, we realized, oh, this is sort of a 180. This is a different perspective on the same sequence of events.
Yeah.
And it really was quite a revelation. The character of Bradley's dad, Joe. who's being played by Joey Alette, who was also in the cast of your other winning play, Stuck, and who is also the other person who's won the Windsor-Essex Playwriting Contest more than once. Strange coincidence there. Um, he's quite a guy. He's old school, right? He's coarse, he's gruff. Tell me about this character.
So the main inspiration for this character was I watched this mini series called Dahmer. It was on
Oh
Netflix. It was
yeah.
pretty big. And it very much highlighted Jeffrey Dahmer's dad and then the role that he played in like all in raising him and everything that he did. And that was kind of a huge inspiration for this character was to kind of have like a gruff kind of, I mean, he's not the exact same as that character in the
Yeah.
Dahmer show, but that kind of tough, like, tough as nails, doesn't want, doesn't like the current generation kind of thing. Like that kind of person is what really inspired him.
He's got definitely an old school an old school feel, an old school idea of what it means to be a man, and all of that. But you also sense in Joe, I mean, I do anyway, that there's a part of him that's trying to move on from his own traumas and his own past, that he feels like as a dad, he's made some improvements on how his dad was, and he was kind of hoping that Bradley would continue to make improvements. This idea that we can get better generation by generation. Was that something you intentionally built in?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Was like, he had I think a huge inspiration for that actually was King of the Hill with
Hmm.
like Hank Hill is
Cotton.
is Cotton is like, this huge asshole to him. And
Yeah.
he like obviously this Joe is not as good of a father as Hank Hill, but it's that same kind of like, oh, my dad was an asshole to me. I'm going to be a lot nicer to my son. And that was kind of where it came from.
Yeah, you definitely get the sense he's somebody who's trying, really hard. And unfortunately, things went the way they did, but he's struggling with what his role is in what Bradley ended up doing and to what extent he's culpable. How do you see, a character like that? Like when it comes to, the sensitive topic like school shooters or, any kid who commits a violent crime, uh, what role do you think the parents play in that child's behavior?
Well, yeah, that's the thing is they play such a huge role in that, and like, and I'm not trying to say that like if you're a parent of a school shooter, you're a bad person. You know what I mean? Like, there's not obviously some people just like they try their hardest and their kid just ends up doing it anyway. But it's like it's inevitable that the way that you raise that child and the principles that you put into your kids and you have to monitor what they're watching and what they're intaking. You got to really communication is like a huge thing. And like I don't want to blame. I don't think a lot of parents should take the blame, but there's definitely some fault in some of them for sure, like with the way they raise their kids and the way they talk to their children or they don't talk to their children. So
Right.
yeah, I think there's definitely some blame for that for sure.
I mean, there are a lot of influences, right? But the parents are definitely one of those big influences for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's another character in the play, Laura, who's played by Nancy Lefebvre, and at one point she says, well, if she had a kid, they would never end up like Bradley did. And she's so confident about this, right? Like her kid would never do such a thing. And Joe points out, well, it's easy for you to say you don't have any kids.
Exactly, right? Yeah, you can't really say that unless you've raised them yourself.
And I guess that in that way, she's sort of representing a very extreme point of view, when it comes to that, the idea that the parent is wholly culpable or responsible for what their kids do. And if you raise them right, then they could never turn out to be violent or aggressive. But as you say, it's not quite that simple. Parents
Yeah,
have,
I don't think it's quite that simple. No,
yeah,
I think she's just being extreme in that situation, and
yeah.
she doesn't like Joe, so that's part of the reason why she's saying that. So
She definitely doesn't like Joe. So that
yeah,
brings us to two of the other characters. Chris and Laura. Chris is played in our production by Heath Canlis. And so you've got this couple. Their relationship is kind of, in a way, one of the centers of the play. It's their relationship and the relationship between Joe and Chris. And they're this couple. They're clearly already, when we meet them at the beginning of the play, they're on the edge, right? Like things have not been going super well for them for, it feels like for a bit. They can feel the tension. But it seems like the catalyst for what destroys their relationship is the friendship that develops between Chris and Joe. And Chris is trying to write a book about the school shooting and focusing on Joe, the shooter's father. And at first, their relationship is a little dodgy, but they end up developing a kind of friendship, and that seems to really put a wedge between Chris and Laura, a wedge in a crack that was already there. Uh,
Right.
how, what can you tell me about the way that that relationship developed as you were writing, the play and the various drafts and ideas that you brought into that?
Um, well, I guess the whole relationship thing was I just a big part of this play, what I wanted to highlight is not I kind of just wanted to show that, you know, men have a lot of like I don't want to say that men have as many problems as women. Like obviously it's a lot harder to be a woman than it is a man. But I did want to just highlight some of the problems that men go through where they're influenced by this toxic masculinity and how that affects their relationships. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like and that's the main part of why I just wanted to show that and how not that men aren't at fault for it, but that they are under a lot of pressure and they're under a lot of influence um
Yeah.
by this toxic masculinity. And like I think a lot of people are just like, well, it's so easy to not be misogynistic. It's so easy to not be racist. It's so easy to not be homophobic. But I do think a lot of men like have this pressure of a person like Joe in their life who influences those things on them. And it is hard for a lot of men to like get away from that. You know what I mean? It's because of their environment is
Right. The people
they
who
have
are around
racist
them.
friends. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I wanted to show.
And so if you're in an environment where you're surrounded by people like Joe, it'd be a lot harder to break free of,
Yeah.
the prejudices and the stereotypes that he embodies. And Chris at the beginning of the play and really throughout, he seems to be somebody, and maybe this is, he is the Millennial Man in the title, obviously, but it seems like a statement about some of the problems that are afflicting that generation. He seems to be adrift. He seems to have very little sense of self, who he is, and he's still looking for it. And he's
Yeah.
hoping that maybe he'll find it in being an author. Whereas his wife, Laura, she seems to have a really solid idea of who she is. And it seems to be quite frustrated by Chris's lack of direction and sort of his aimlessness, and she seems to have lost faith in him at this point. Do you think that there is a divide in that millennial generation between the accomplishments of women and the accomplishments of men?
Well, yeah. Well, I think there's a point where Chris is almost intimidated by Laura and everything she's accomplished. You know what I mean? And that like affects him. And I think he feels like he has to prove himself because of that. You know what I mean? He has to he has to like find his voice and he has to be this author and he has to be this person because I don't want, my wife to be the breadwinner of the house and I don't want people to see my wife paying for my stuff. And you know what I mean? Like he doesn't want that. Yeah, I do think there is that generational divide of like, like women are kind of motivated by, like, oh, I'm just going to prove everyone wrong. People think a woman can't do this stuff. I'm going to prove them wrong. And men are more motivated by, I don't want people to think I'm a wimp. You know what I mean? So I'm going to show them I'm not. And, I guess there's that dynamic between those two motivations.
Yeah, and one of the first encounters between Chris and Joe kind of points out and makes fun of Chris for, not being able to support himself and for, being lazy and shiftless and so forth. He doesn't
Yeah.
really hold back.
No, he doesn't. No, he just goes right at him. That's the thing about Joe is he's brutally honest,
Yeah.
that's just his nature. And he just says he doesn't really have a filter, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. He
yeah.
reminds me of, one of the things I love about German people, at least the German people I've known in my life, quite a few actually. But I love that I never have to worry about where I stand with them. They'll just tell me, and
Yeah.
and if they don't like me, I'll know. I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. There's an honesty to it that I enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and we talked a lot with the cast about what's behind the people that Chris and Laura are. And it was decided, Keith really wanted to go this direction that, Keith didn't, that Chris didn't really have a father figure in his life, or his father wasn't really very present in his life. And so the fact that we see a lot of him very often in the play taking up domestic work and so forth, he interpreted that as the result of someone who grew up with a mother who he loved and who doted on him, and that he learned to do things that pleased his mother, but he always kind of needed or wanted some sort of father figure in his life. And one of the reasons that Joe can have such an influence on him is that he can represent that. He's this traditional form of masculinity who can fill that father void in his life. And maybe that makes Joe especially dangerous to someone like Chris. With, the number of households and, in recent decades that are single parent households and stuff, do you think this is more of a problem now than it used to be?
Um, yeah, I'm not sure if it's more of a problem. I think this problem has always existed where like even if the father is there, sometimes he's distant or
Yeah,
like they never
yeah,
see each other, that kind of
true.
thing.
Yeah, it's true.
So like me, yeah, I don't know if it's more, but it's definitely, still like prevalent today. I don't think it's been fixed or anything, it's I don't know if it's a problem you can fix, you know what I mean? It's just well, like maybe, but it's just one of those it's always going to happen kind of things,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's fair. Um, Laura, on the other hand, seems to have had a very stable family life, and there's just no hint in Laura that she's that she's ever really um, wondered who she is or really cared what other people thought about her, which makes her a really refreshing character and sort of the huge foil for Joe because, good Lord, does she not like Joe from the beginning and won't stand up for any crap from him at all? There's this wonderful scene that you wrote in the first act between the two of them where, not only does Laura not back down and is she not intimidated by him, excuse the cat. Um, this is Mr. Business, everyone. Um, but she calls him out and is even a little bit cruel to him about the death of his son. That scene really stuck out for me because I think you take some risks in that scene that for me I think pay off really, really well. You write what seems to me a really honest confrontation between these two people. But I think a lot of writers might have been timid about writing such a scene. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So another inspiration for this play is this one movie. I forget what it's called. It's called Mass. And it's about a school shooting. It's about these it is again 10 years later. It's the school shooters are talking with the parents of someone of a kid who died. And
Oh
it's just
wow.
like they're all in a room together and they're just discussing the school shooting. And a what was the question again? Sorry.
Uh, it was about the risks and the that you
Oh
take
yeah, yeah,
on
that
writing
one
the
scene.
scene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with Laura and okay, yeah. So like part of that was just one of the mothers like in that scene, she just like kind of just went crazy on the parents of the school shooters and just like told them to F off. And I saw that and I thought it was powerful.
Yeah.
And it's part of the inspiration for that scene was to just, like Laura is just unapologetic about it. She thinks what happened was terrible and she's she's not gonna, take that for an answer that he didn't, like, she's not gonna take that crap for an answer that he didn't have some sort of influence or he couldn't have stopped it. She's just F you. I know you could have stopped. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah, yeah.
unapologetic because of how terrible it was, that kind of thing.
There's a tender moment in that scene too, where Joe tries to get her to understand, that he's also a victim of what his son did, and that one of the kids who died that day was his son,
Yeah.
and that he wished that had never happened. Um, he's probably saying this to the wrong person, but in a way, in terms of how receptive she is, but also the right person, because it's the people who can't bring themselves to empathize with him that he needs to empathize with most, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's hard for people to accept that, obviously.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
I don't know if I would, if someone, told me that, I don't know if what my reaction would be. I might have the same reaction as Laura, but
yeah. I think it would take a
yeah,
very big person to be able to take that much of an of an empathetic leap to really feel compassion for someone whose kid killed their own.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, not not an easy task at all. Okay, so I want to talk about Patrick, because Patrick is the fourth character in this play, and doesn't have as many scenes as the others, but is very, very important. And one of the things that I find fascinating about Patrick is that he represents a completely different kind of masculinity, a completely different way of being a man than Joe represents. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so yeah, like I think he's a straightforward guy. He's a salesman. I think early, like in one of Act Two or something, he talks about, he's gonna get this client at the Dixie Mart, and Laura says, "Oh, yeah, good luck getting them." He's like, "Oh, you'll see, I'll get them anyway." He's very confident in himself, but he's not like an asshole to other people. Like, what I like, that's just like the key to it, really. Is like you can be a confident man, you can, be boastful, you can be loud, you can be outspoken, but you just gotta, not put other people down. That's just really the key and the difference between someone like Joe and Patrick. Because I think Joe and Patrick actually do have a lot in common, where like Patrick is also kind of brutally honest, but he's a
Yeah.
lot more, he goes about it in a much better way, and he doesn't, offend people the way that Joe does. And yeah,
Yeah.
he's just like a lot more calm and like a lot smarter, I guess, is kind of the thing, I guess.
Yeah. Patrick, who in our production is played by Ezra Poku Christian, he's got, as you say, confidence. He's self-assured. He knows who he is. He makes his decisions. Um, he's not shy about, talking about his accomplishments and things like that. But he also seems to really consider the needs of other people. And he's honest, and sometimes, in at least one case, brutally so, but in a way also that he, he spends some time trying to figure out, it seems, what the best way to say something is. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's consideration for the other person that you don't really see in Joe at all.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I think, Joe sees someone like Chris who doesn't have that kind of confidence, and he sees it as a weakness.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not, yeah, it's like he just doesn't know the right way to go about things. It's just
Yeah. And you think for Chris, Patrick could represent something he could aspire to, that is like Joe, that is a kind of masculinity, but a kind that isn't toxic, that includes things like compassion and so forth. But he can't get there. He can't get there in part. I mean, there's clearly he recognizes something in Patrick, because it's so easy for Joe to convince him that Patrick might be having an affair with Laura, his wife. And there's jealousy, there's a rivalry there. And to me, that kind of thing, jealousy and rivalry, always indicates that you see something in that other person that you wish you had, or
yeah.
that you wish you were. But he can't take the steps necessary to get there. What do you think holds him back?
I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, what holds him back. I think it just might just be his like overall like lack of confidence. Like maybe just, in his other days, like there's something happened where he might have been bullied as a kid, and he just never gained that confidence in his early days, and it continued into adulthood. He never really accomplished anything. He's a failed writer. So he's gotten rejected like many times, and even though he thinks he's great and everyone else sucks, that does have like it hurt, it still has it hurts him a little bit. It hurts his ego, he doesn't have that same I just yeah, I don't think he's able to gain any confidence because he's just he's never really accomplished much in his life, right?
Yeah, I mean, he tries to project confidence and he puts down other writers and so forth. And, he has got nothing positive to say really about any other writers. But it comes across as a false confidence that he hasn't earned. It comes across as arrogance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so a place of resentment rather than a place of accomplishment.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's really, and I feel like a lot of, I'm sometimes like that, right? Where I'll see a writer who's accomplished more than someone like me, and I'll be like, oh, they're just, I don't know, they have the connections. They're a nepo baby, that kind of thing. I'll make excuses, and at the end of the day, it's just, it's jealousy, like you said. It's something I wish I had, that kind of thing.
We all have our moments, right, of weakness and resentment and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And hopefully we get to other moments. I mean, I love the experience of reading work by someone that makes me sort of sit back and go, "Oh my God, my mind just could never do that." I love
Yeah,
that experience when I'm feeling, less vulnerable.
very true. Very true.
Um, So let's get to, I think, what it was the central scene of the play. And it's the scene that when I read the first version of the script that was submitted to the Windsor-Essex Playwriting Contest, it's the one that really excited me the most. I mean, I was excited getting up to it too, but I thought, man, this scene has the potential to just be so explosive and to really generate so much conversation amongst people who see the play. And that is the dinner scene, the
Yeah.
dinner party in Act Two. Um, and I think we can talk about that without spoiling the ending. Yeah, we can. So tell me about how that came to be and what it was like to write such an incendiary scene where, again, like in the scene between Laura and Joe, you take a lot of risks and you make a lot of choices that I think that many writers would be too timid to make.
Well, it just to me, it felt like then a natural progression of the script at that point. It's all the characters come together and they have a dinner, and you know uh I think that's just such a dinner time is the place where people say things. It's where you have the conversations. It's where things come out. So that was just so like it just so felt so natural to me that yeah, we got to have them somehow have a dinner. All the characters have to have a dinner with each other, and the tensions gotta rise. From this dinner, and it just felt it was it was something I was like when I started the script. I just knew that that was going to happen at some point in time. I didn't know where, but I was like, we got to have some sort of a dinner scene where they all come together.
We got to get all these people in one room somehow.
Exactly, yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So many great scripts and plays and movies have, just a super memorable dinner scene. There's something about that. Maybe it's because everyone can relate to it. There's something about a great dinner scene that just draws me in. I'm thinking the ones that come up really in the top of my head, Goodfellas,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
Hereditary. Oh,
Oh,
and
true.
The Heat. Have you seen that with Melissa McCarthy and Sandra
No,
Bullock?
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's hilarious. There's a dinner party scene or a dinner scene with Melissa McCarthy's very, very Boston Irish family. That it's hilarious, but it's a centerpiece of so many movies, and often for me, either the most memorable scene in the movie or one of the most memorable scenes in the movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
This play is going to be like that. So. I mean, one sense that I get from that scene, or one impression I get from that scene, is that you really committed, I think, to um, instead of thinking, where do I want this scene to go? What do I want to happen at the end of this scene? Which is a really tempting trap that, writers, we all fall into that. Um, you really let yourself get into the headspace and into the voice of each character and let each character respond as they would.
Hmm.
Uh, that's a difficult thing for a lot of writers to do. Can you talk about how you do that, your way of approaching that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of try to put myself in everyone's headspace, you know. The one thing I think is key to doing that is to not hate any of your characters. Uh,
Yes, yes.
no matter like how much of a terrible person they are, there's a reason why they are the way they are, and you have to empathize with that in some way, and you have to really get into their head and see things from their perspective. And even if they're being completely unreasonable, you have to really think like, well, what are they offended by? What are they, like you got to really, yeah, get in their headspace, and that, you got to understand that character as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point. So you mentioned the importance of for you if you really want to get into the character's head and write authentic dialogue, authentic action for them, it's important not to hate any of your characters. And I think that's such an important point. And a corollary to that, I think, would be to not to not um to not make any of your characters uh, saints or heroes, in that way. Like you have to be able to see your characters as humans, as flawed individuals who have, virtues and vices, pros and cons, and so forth. Um, did you face temptations with any of the characters in this play, where you had to step back and say, uh, I am, I'm valorizing this character too much. I'm idealizing this character too much.
Um, I don't know about this play. Maybe with some of like maybe with some of like the scenes with maybe Laura and Patrick where I felt like they were maybe like too like heroes. Like there were a couple drafts of the play where I made them I made them like so offended and so like couldn't believe that like Chris would write a story about a school shooter, and they were like so offended by that, and it just came off as like they're just so that's so not authentic of like who they actually are and like what the kind of people they are. So yeah,
Because
I guess, yeah.
you still had an idea in your head of who these people were, so you were able to detect the falseness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So having a strong sense in your mind of who each of these people are, that helps you stay true to their characters too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's excellent advice. I hope whoever watches this video takes that advice because that approach I can say worked out aces in this script. Uh,
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
happens feels authentic, to me
Yeah.
anyway. I know I'm a pretty harsh judge. Um, um, the other thing other thing I want to get into with you was the idea that Laura raises at several different points of the fact that she does find it offensive, or maybe not offensive, at least um, I don't know what the right word is, a little gross that Chris is so into this subject and that he would write a book about school shooters. And she raises the possibility that all of the purposes that he brings up for what the book might accomplish in terms of drawing attention to something important or helping to educate people and so forth. She kind of calls them out and says that they're bullshit, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And retains this perspective throughout the play. Um, is that something that you've encountered a lot, or is that something that comes from your own thinking as you've gone through life?
Well, I mean, I always talk to my mom about like kind of the stuff that I'm writing, and she's like, "Well, why would you want to write about that? Like, why would you want to say that?" And it's like, okay, because it's interesting, it's cool, like. some people like are just kind of, I've talked to people about this play specifically, and they're just kind of look at me like, oh, that's cool that you're writing about that, and I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? Like it's not
Yeah,
because I
I know what you
want
mean.
to shoot up a school myself. It's just that I think it's very interesting the way that, these characters, you know, these people, like how they become someone who eventually shoots up the school, or how they become a murderer. It's all very interesting. It's never a boring story. So
Yeah, yeah. I've a lot of my own research is in areas that overlap with this, and yeah, I mean, my interests have not passed the mom test or grandmother test on many occasions.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm somebody I empathize with Chris's interest because I'm somebody who relaxes to, interrogation videos, body cam videos, courtroom videos, true crime podcasts, things like that. So to me, that's how I get ready for bed at night. And I listen to these things. And then sometimes, my partner, Faye, she doesn't want to hear the next morning about what I was listening to when I went to bed. But um, I can empathize though with perspectives like Laura's and like your mom's, where they see something kind of sick about it.
Yeah.
Is there I'm asking you this in order to save my own soul, John. Is there you think a real purpose that can be achieved by paying attention to these kinds of stories and telling these kinds of stories?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah, I think there's like a lot of authors and writers out there who they study these things for the reason to educate the public. And I think that the more we know about these things is the better we can prevent them. And I don't know like if Chris is actually doing that in this play.
Right.
I think there is a fine line between, are you just sensationalizing this thing, or are you actually doing it for a point? I'll bring up the series Dahmer again. There was a lot of criticism for that. It was like, well, we all know that, like, it's a very famous story. We all know the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Why do we need a 10 episode series about, him, in seeing him, kill these guys and manipulate them? And at what point are we just, is it just, murder pornography, at some
Right.
point? But I do think that especially in that Dahmer series, they brought up a lot of interesting points, like how the police were, not helping because there was a lot of the victims were black men, so they were ignoring a
Yeah.
lot of the signs and everything. So I
Yeah.
thought that was a really good point to bring up and to educate the
Yeah.
public on, and so I
Yeah.
think there is a point to these things that they're not just doing it for sensationalism.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we can, I don't know, I think with enough experience anyway, you can tell the difference between the presentation of a story that is really trying to help you understand and a story that's presented as sensationalist tabloid fodder, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I thought the
Yeah,
Dahmer series did that well. I mean, I've got books to my left somewhere about Dahmer, and I've learned things from that series that I didn't know. And
right.
as with the Gacy case and so many others, there were so many opportunities for the police to prevent people from being killed and to stop it from happening. And one of the things I've learned from imbibing so many of these stories over time is that when it comes to serial killers, for instance, there were almost always several missed opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. That's see
And
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, and you can see in the way that police approach these things now that they have learned from what's happened in the past. The 70s was the heyday of this, but especially the 70s, they've learned, for instance, to pay attention to, um, you know, teenagers who disappear instead of dismissing them as runaways and things like that, that took time and took a lot of deaths for police forces to really take seriously.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's because people analyze these situations and they put out the stories and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Thank you. I feel better about myself now.
yeah, there we go. Sounds good.
I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for people about how the story ends because the ending of the play is so explosive. One of the wonderful structural things for structure nerds like me about the script is that you start with the longest scene in the play. I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And 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 then, the dinner scene is, I guess, the second longest, comes early in the second act. But generally speaking, the scenes get shorter in Act Two than they were in Act One. So you really get this sense of climactic action, this sense of momentum in the second
Mhm.
act that I think comes across really well. Was that something that just happened, or were you conscious of it?
Oh, I was conscious of it.
Yeah.
One of the first plays I ever acted in was a play called Lost in Yonkers,
Oh, yeah.
and the first scene of that play is very long. It's like the longest scene in the play. And as I was writing that first scene, I thought it was like maybe it's going on a little too long, but then I remembered the Lost in Yonkers. That first scene is super long too. So why not? Why not in my play as well?
Yeah, yeah. And then, after the dinner party, it really feels like we are on a fast moving train toward the conclusion,
Yeah.
and I think audiences will really find that quite a wild ride. But what brings me to, and without spoilers, um, sort of the last major thing I wanted to ask you about it, and it's the way the way Chris and Laura's relationship deteriorates and the way each of them approaches the what seems to me inevitability of that disintegration. Um, it follows an arc that is, I think, really, really believable and something that I've seen happen, in life many, many times. And one of the things that really struck me about how you've written that is that one of the parties, they both know it's happening, although Laura seems to be more aware of it than Chris at the beginning. But whereas Laura accepts that we're probably heading toward the end, although maybe, she kind of gives a couple of chances. Maybe, Chris could pull something off. She seems to have resigned herself to the fact that it's probably coming to an end, whereas Chris never is able to accept that and constantly seems to think that they're in almost a honeymoon state that they were at the beginning, or that they could be in a honeymoon state. Can you talk to me
Mhm.
about your thoughts and how you wrote that relationship? Because it really is a tragic story that binds the whole thing together.
Well, I just think it's part of Chris's delusion, like the fact that he thinks he's such a great writer and he just thinks, oh, my relationship's great. We're still in love. And he doesn't want to like admit to himself that he knows deep down inside that it's over and he knows that this relationship is on the rocks or whatever, but he's not willing to like actually say that to himself. And he just thinks that if I just tell myself that it's all fine, it'll be all fine. That's just what he's continuously telling himself.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if there's really an inspiration for this relationship specifically. It just kind of, I guess it's what I've seen, in my life too, is just, there's, the typical like guy who's like, oh, I'm gonna make it one day, and just isn't getting along with his life, and then the woman is just so far beyond him, you know what I mean? Or like it's vice versa. It works, the different way too. So
Yeah.
it's just something you see.
Yeah. We're actually we're rewatching Breaking Bad right now, and it kind of reminds me of Walt and Skyler's relationship in the first few seasons, where, you know, once Skyler seems to have a sense that Walt is lying about things, she seems to know where the train is going. Whereas
Yeah,
Walt, it takes him a very long time to come around.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's probably like subconsciously that's part of like why I wrote it that
But I
way.
mean, I've seen that happen in so many real relationships too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And in this case, I think you've made a good case for it being part of Chris's overall delusional approach to life. That he's constantly telling himself a much more positive story about who he is and what his life is like than the evidence would support.
yeah, 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 exactly.
What do you hope that people take away from seeing what's new, which way Millennial Man when it opens on February 21st?
Yeah, I always get this question with some scripts I've written, and I never really know how to answer. It's I guess I just want people to um just kind of I guess just kind of not really have more like empathy for like people like Bradley, but have more like I guess to just, to treat each other a little nicer, and to have a little more empathy for like, just because, someone, I guess someone might, be like a Joe in your life, and they might have, asshole ideas, but you should still have empathy for those people, even though they're, an old man stuck in their ways and, they're always complaining about something. I think, they're still humans. You should still have empathy for those people. I guess that's what I would say.
Try to understand,
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. To paraphrase Plato, we are all fighting a private battle.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great message, man. Thank you. So thank you very much, Jonathan. Which Way Millennial Man opens at the Shadowbox Theater on February 21st, 2025 for a 3-week run. It stars Heath Canlis, Nancy Lefebvre, um, Joey Ulett, and Ezra Poku Christian. It is a fabulous play. Please come out to support it. Come out to support local art and come out to support a talented young writer who has now won our playwriting contest twice and whose work I can't wait to read more of in the future. Thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you guys.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you as well. Bye.